All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's explainer on a topic that you absolutely must master if you're a nursing student or a healthcare provider. We are talking about aortic stenosis, the silent cardiac killer. This isn't just your run-of-the-mill heart condition. It's actually the most dangerous valvular disorder you're going to see tested on the NCLEX, and it's the #1 cause of sudden cardiac death when it comes to valve disease. So let's lock in and break this whole thing down. I want you to really feel the weight of this right off the bat. The most dangerous valvular disorder. That's not an exaggeration. This is the deadliest valve disease you will encounter out there in clinical practice. And the part that makes it so incredibly tricky for us? Giving these patients some really common cardiac drugs can literally kill them. No joke. So we've got to be hyper-vigilant from the very first assessment. Here's the game plan for us today. We'll start by defining the silent cardiac killer, figure out how to spot the SAD triad, visualize the danger at the valve, go over that ultimate life or death medication warning, compare the surgical fixes like SAVR and TAVR, and wrap it all up with essential nursing care. Okay, part 1, the silent cardiac killer. Let's look at the hidden threat. So what exactly is happening under the hood here? The absolute crucial thing to grasp is the mechanical failure. Aortic stenosis, or AS, is the narrowing of the aortic valve orifice. It creates this fixed obstruction, totally blocking the blood flow from the left ventricle out into the aorta during systole. Think of it like trying to force a thick, heavy milkshake through one of those tiny little cocktail straws. The heart physically just cannot push the blood out to the rest of the body the way it needs to. And this mechanical failure, it sets off a terrifying domino effect. First, those valve leaflets get thickened and calcified, usually just from aging, or maybe the patient was born with a bicuspid valve. That narrows the opening. Now, to push past that roadblock, the left ventricle has to generate massively higher pressures. We call this LV pressure overload. The heart's response to this is actually pretty brilliant, but ultimately doomed. It goes into concentric hypertrophy. The muscle walls beef up to pump harder, but the actual space inside the cavity stays the exact same size. Over time, that huge hypertrophied muscle gets incredibly stiff. It loses its bounce, it's totally non-compliant, and eventually, it just starts to fail. And the level of that obstruction is honestly kind of shocking, less than 1 square centimeter. Now, to put that into perspective, a normal healthy aortic valve is about 3 to 4 square centimeters. So by the time a patient hits stage D, which is the severe symptomatic stage, their poor heart is desperately struggling to squeeze their entire body's blood supply through an opening smaller than a dime. It's a wildly precarious situation. All right, moving on to part 2, recognizing the SAD triad. These are the critical symptoms. This SAD triad right here, absolute NCLEX gold: syncope, angina, and dyspnea. Once these symptoms show up, the clock is ticking fast. S stands for syncope, which is fainting when they exert themselves. Because of that fixed roadblock in the valve, the heart's output literally cannot increase during exercise. The brain gets starved of blood and boom, they pass out. Without surgery, survival after syncope starts is just 2 to 3 years. A is for angina, or chest pain. That massive, thickened left ventricle is screaming for extra oxygen, but the blood flow can't keep up, causing ischemia. Survival after angina starts, roughly 3 to 5 years. And then D is for dyspnea, shortness of breath that leads right into heart failure. This is the worst-case scenario. The ventricle is failing, fluid is backing up into the lungs, and without a brand new valve, survival plummets to an average of just 1 to 2 years. Let's move to part 3. Visualizing the valve danger. How do we catch this at the bedside? So, what does this actually sound like? It's super distinct. For aortic stenosis, just remember the acronym RASH. It radiates to the neck. It's loud and harsh. It's a systolic crescendo to crescendo sound, and you're going to hear it best at the right second intercostal space. Actually, compare that to mitral regurgitation for a second. MR is a softer, hollow systolic sound down at the apex that radiates over to the axilla, the armpit. So if you've got your stethoscope on the upper right chest and you hear this harsh systolic sound shooting straight up into their neck, bingo, that's aortic stenosis. Beyond just listening to the murmur, there are a few classic hemodynamic clues you'll spot. First up, a narrow pulse pressure, something like 110/90. The top and bottom numbers get squeezed really close together because that strictured valve just refuses to let a large volume of blood out all at once. And that directly causes our next sign, which has a fun name, pulsus parvus et tardus. It essentially means you'll feel a really weak, delayed pulse in their carotid artery. Lastly, you're probably going to hear an S4 gallop. That's the sound of the atrium frantically kicking blood into that stiff, non-compliant left ventricle we talked about earlier. These patients absolutely rely on that extra atrial kick just to maintain basic output. Okay, part 4, the ultimate medication warning. This is literally life or death. I want you to stop and ask yourself this right now. What is the absolute #1 drug safety priority for aortic stenosis? Let's say your patient starts having chest pain. What is the one incredibly common cardiac medication that you must never, ever give them? And here's the big reveal. Vasodilators are strictly contraindicated. No nitrates, like nitroglycerin. No hydralazine. No aggressive ACE inhibitors. Why? Well, think about it. They have a fixed obstruction. If you give a vasodilator, you drastically drop their systemic vascular resistance. Normally, a healthy heart would just beat faster and harder to compensate for that, right? But this stenotic heart physically can't increase its output. It's blocked. The result? Their blood pressure totally bottoms out, they pass out, and you are staring down a potential cardiac arrest. Never give nitroglycerin without a highly specialized explicit provider order. Oh, and we also have to be super careful with aggressive diuresis. If you dry them out too much, you drop the filling pressures that their stiff heart desperately needs to function.
All right, let's talk solutions. Part 5, surgical fixes, specifically SAVR versus TAVR.
The contrast between the traditional and the modern approach here is just night and day. SAVR, surgical aortic valve replacement, is your classic open heart surgery. It's a brutal 4 to 8 week recovery, and if they end up with a mechanical valve, they are looking at lifelong warfarin. Plus, you'll literally hear a clicking sound in their chest. On the flip side, we have TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. This is minimally invasive. They usually just thread it up through the femoral artery using a catheter. Recovery, just 2 to 5 days. And instead of being on warfarin forever, they usually just go on dual antiplatelet therapy, like aspirin and clopidogrel. It's a total game changer, especially for our older or high-risk patients who couldn't survive open heart surgery. But, TAVR isn't a magic bullet. There are still major risks. Check out this post-op timeline. For the first 15 minutes to an hour, you are laser-focused on that femoral access site, hunting for bleeding or hematomas, and checking those pedal pulses. For the next 4 to 6 hours, that leg has to stay perfectly straight, and the head of the bed needs to be under 45 degrees. And for the whole first 24 hours, you are on incredibly high alert for 2 things: stroke, because moving that old calcified valve around can dislodge emboli, and heart block. That new valve gets deployed right next to the heart's electrical conduction system, so bradycardia and AV blocks are a huge risk. They might even end up needing a permanent pacemaker. Finally, part 6, essential nursing patient care. It's all about vigilance and safety. Because these patients literally cannot dial up their cardiac output when they need to, your nursing care has to account for that massive limitation. The second a patient says they feel dizzy or have a syncopal episode, immediate fall precautions go into place, non-negotiable. If they get chest pain or their oxygen drops below 94%, you stop whatever activity they're doing instantly. We're also doing strict INOs and daily weights because, as we talked about, their fluid balance is walking a tightrope. Most importantly, if your patient experiences exertional syncope, you lay them completely flat, assess those ABCs, and you report it stat. That is a massive red flag warning sign of impending sudden cardiac death.
Oh, and we cannot forget this universally critical NCLEX rule. Anyone with a deformed, stenotic, or bicuspid aortic valve is at a ridiculously high risk for infective endocarditis. The blood flow is just so turbulent there. If they roll in with a fever or a brand new, louder murmur, you always draw 2 sets of blood cultures from 2 different sites before you even think about starting antibiotics. Plus, they need to know they're going to require prophylactic antibiotics before any dental cleanings for the rest of their lives. Let's bring it all home with a final thought here. As a healthcare provider, how will your vigilant patient advocacy be the final line of defense against sudden cardiac death? Listen, aortic stenosis leaves absolutely zero room for error. Your ability to educate your patients about strict exertion limits, making sure they understand the urgency of the SAD triad, and empowering them to literally refuse contraindicated drugs like nitroglycerin, that is the stuff that saves lives. You are their safety net. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay focused out there, stay vigilant, and I will catch you in the next one.